These are in listen-only mode.
Well, good morning, everybody. We are delighted to have our action webinar this morning about voting your values. We're delighted to have everybody on with us. So thank you so much for attending our webinar. This is the first webinar that we have ever done, and it's just a little exciting for us. So we're pleased to be able to do this. So we have a number of things to present to you this morning and a number of presenters. And so we are going to get started right away. Our very first presenter is going to be Amy Voigt. And Amy's going to talk about some letters that we toss around a lot. It's GOTV. So, Amy, I'm going to switch this over to you. And
All right.
there you go.
All right. Did my screen come up?
Yes. For me, yes.
All right. Well, let's talk about get out the vote, and it's one of these things that people inside of politics like to talk about.
Amy, I'm going to interrupt you one more time. I'm so sorry about this.
No problem.
I just wanted to tell everybody, you can ask questions just by typing that, where it says type message here, you can ask a question. So at any time, and I'll see your question, and then we'll be able to ask Amy. So anyway, I won't interrupt anymore. Go ahead, Amy. Thanks.
Well, it's the time of year when we hear the initials GOTV thrown around a lot, and so few people know what those mean. But GOTV stands for Get Out the Vote, and it's something that political parties talk about because it really is important to make sure that the right people are voting. One of the things that we're battling in this election, we're battling actually several things. One, Christian voters feel very uninformed about the candidates and their positions. Christian voters feel uncomfortable sometimes with one or more details of Romney's platform or past. In 2008, one of the things that sunk the Republican Party was distrust of John McCain. A lot of Christians felt that he wasn't pro-life enough, wasn't strong enough on the issues that people of faith like us typically care about. And another thing that we're battling is that there is just a general distrust of political parties across the board. People don't have time to follow all the political issues and keep up with their busy lives. People are screening their incoming contact by deleting emails without opening them, ignoring calls from members they don't recognize, or from political parties or candidates or telemarketers. Anyway, as Christians, we tend to be conscience-driven. And in 2008, many Christians chose to not vote rather than risk enabling sin by voting for the wrong person. In fact, Christians were so confused that less than a third of Christians even voted at all. And I'm not here to argue that John McCain is a good guy or a bad guy, but I am here to tell you Obama is significantly worse. And regardless of what you think about the details of John McCain personally, I'm willing to bet that he wouldn't be compromising our national security, requiring faith-based organizations to fund abortion and birth control, or leaving our allies like Israel to fend for themselves against their regional enemies. Anyway, as Christians, we can use our vote to promote good or to fight evil or to do both. And it's my belief that we have a responsibility to our world to be salt and light. And we can increase our Christian influence on the world by not only voting, but also getting others to vote as well, by conducting small-scale get out the vote among people who share our values. So let's discuss some things that you can do to maximize your impact on the coming election. Let's talk about this in 3 steps. Register, educate, and activate. Voter registration is first. Voter education is second, and voter activation, or get out the vote, is third. But you know, it sounds better to say voter registration, voter education, and voter activation. Let's talk about voter registration. This may sound pretty basic for some of you, but never assume anything. But you need to know that just because you're an American doesn't mean that you're automatically registered to vote. You have to register to vote, and you have to make sure that your address is current. If you've registered at a previous address and you haven't updated it, please make sure that you do that. Anyway, to register, what you need is a voter registration form. I strongly encourage you to just get your hands on a stack of them and pass them out to like-minded people at work, at church, among your family members. You get the idea. Voter registration forms can either be turned in by the voter who's registering, or you can pass them out and collect them and mail them back. But one thing to drive home to people is that voter registration forms have to be received by a certain date. In my understanding, that date is 1 month before the election. That means that voter registration forms need to be in the election department's hands before October 6th. As you see on my PowerPoint, it says before October 3rd. That's just to make sure that those get in on time. So that's voter registration. The next, and that's something from now until October 3rd, that's something for you to focus on, because the more like-minded people we get registered, the more like-minded votes we potentially have. So that's voter registration. You can download registration forms at votespa.com and print them out, or you can pick up hard copies at any DMV. Now, on October 3rd or October 6th, whenever you stop registering voters, let's talk about the next segment of time that's between October 3rd and November 3rd. And that's when we move from voter registration to voter education. In the month before the election, everyone who can vote will already be registered, and it's time to start informing those people about the issues. And voter education, very simply, is the process of talking to people, Christians, neighbors, people who share our values in a very generic sense, and helping them transition to understanding our values in a very specific sense, and how our values apply to very specific issues. And it doesn't have to be confrontational. It can be as simple and gentle as statements like, you know, as a Christian, I believe that God has a plan for every life. And when I read in the Bible that God knit us together in our mother's womb, I believe that life begins at conception. And as a Christian, I feel that voting for pro-life candidates is one thing that I can do to express my faith. You know, another idea is, I know neither candidate is perfect, but Mitt Romney at least has an agenda to reduce the national debt. And I think that fundamentally he's got a more American and Christian belief system than Obama. There are just very gentle things that you can do to help Christians translate biblical truths or learn how to apply biblical truths to social issues. Now, we don't have time today to go over in this presentation every single issue, but I'd like to point out that there are a couple resources you should get your hands on. Action has a value sheet that does a great job, and I think Gwen will go over that later, but it does a great job breaking down issues very specifically, attaching the biblical truths to the social issues and where the parties stand on each of those issues. Secondly, the Pennsylvania Family Institute puts out a voter guide that shows in detail where each candidate stands on issues. So my strong encouragement to you is that you get your hands on multiple copies of both of those resources and help educate people that you know, help educate them on how to cast a Christian vote. So we've talked about voter registration. We've talked about voter education. Now let's talk about voter activation. This is GOTV. It's get out the vote. It's making sure that your friends vote and using every resource in your power to make sure that they vote the right way. And this is something that after you've spent a month pounding home the ideas that that as Christians, there is a right and wrong on abortion and on traditional marriage and on who globally we ally ourselves with and whether we protect our country and protect the freedoms that we have. There is right and wrong on these issues. But around the time of the election, that's the weekend before the election, when people begin to think about voting, that's when you're really going to have their ear for the first time, because up until that point, you can subtly influence them through conversation and by providing resources. But the weekend before the election, that's game day. So all the happy thoughts in the world and all the right information in the world doesn't do any good if we don't get those people to cast a vote, to vote on election day. So really we have 4 tools, 4 steps to maximizing the number, helping you maximize the number of your friends who will cast Christian pro-life ballots on election day. The first is a friend sheet. The second is sample ballots. The third is making sure they know election day is coming. And the fourth is making absolutely sure they vote. Voting accountability is what I call it, because as generally polite people, you know, we like to please our friends. We like to get along with the people that we know. So voting accountability. So let's talk about friend sheets for a few minutes. Now, friend sheets, this might be the first time you've heard of them, but friend sheets are an incredible silver bullet in an election, because the Republican Party is running their databases and they've been contacting the same people this whole time. But there are people who have the potential to cast votes that may not even be on the GOP radar. That's where you come in handy. A friend sheet, and this will be available on actionofpa.org, but a friend sheet is where you sit down, you make a list of friends, relatives, neighbors, people you know who support our Christian values, or even if it's just in a generic sense. I strongly encourage you to go ahead, even if you have it in your address book, on this sheet, list the name, list the home and cell phone number, list the email address. It just makes it so much easier to sit down with this sheet. So look at the sheet you see on the screen. It has a place for the names. It has a place for the home and cell phones and emails, and a voted column. That voted column with a question mark, that's the voting accountability. So once you have your list of 10, 20, 30, or 40 names, let's talk about how to manage them. I'm going to forward the slide here to give you the big picture. Do you see what begins on the Friday before the election, where it says email sample ballots to friends? This is the game plan, and I'm going to talk about each step in this thing here. So one thing that we've learned in studying politics is that different people respond to different types of communication. Some people respond to phone calls, some read emails, some flip through the mail they get in their mailbox. You get the idea. So the game plan here is to make sure we diversify our contact with each person on your friends list. So how many kinds of communication are there? Well, let's see. We've got emailing sample ballots. We've got calling to see if friends have questions. You get the idea. So let's go into each of these in more detail. How to effectively use your friend sheet. Email your friends the week before the election, and I suggest Friday, but anytime the week before the election is fine, with a link for them to get a sample ballot on actionofpa.org. And sample ballots are a great resource, because unlike just a Republican sample ballot or a Democrat sample ballot, Action actually puts out a sample ballot that a Christian can trust, because it doesn't just follow party lines, although often it does, simply because Republicans tend to align more with our values than Democrats. But it looks at each candidate from a Christian perspective. So it's a great resource to give to people of faith who aren't fully informed and haven't done the research personally on the candidates. So email them the week before the election with a link to get a sample ballot on action@pa.org. Then, don't just assume that they've done it. On Saturday, call through those home phone numbers on Saturday to see if your friends have any questions about the candidates. Give them a chance to look at the sample ballot. But again, you're calling the Saturday before the election in plenty of time for them to still go to the website and get the sample ballot if they haven't done it yet. But that's another level of accountability. You're calling their home phone number on the Saturday before the election to ask them if they have any questions, and just make yourself available with your opinion and your information. Then on Sunday, you have a couple of different options. A lot of times people are very sensitive to getting a phone call or being solicited on Sunday, and rightly so. But one thing that we can do is, in the past, I'm aware of churches that pass out remember to vote on Tuesday, voting reminder postcards on the Sunday before an election. Now, use your judgment on that. If you go to a strongly conservative church, then yeah, absolutely remind your fellow congregants to vote. If you don't go to a conservative church, maybe you just get through Sunday, and then on Monday pick your friends list back up again. On Monday, call them and remind them. Call them on their home phone numbers again. If you don't get them on their home, get them on their cell phone. Call them and remind them that the election is the next day and how important their vote is. You know, when we're dealing with people who, if their lives are anything like mine, Tuesday is just Tuesday. You wake up in the morning, you get your kids breakfast, you get them off to school, you've got a to-do list a mile long, and what you have to do is communicate to each person, not just that it would be nice if they vote or that it's their civic duty. Communicate to them what is at stake in this election. When we talk to them on Monday, it's not just about like, oh, you know, it's your patriotic duty. It's about life is under assault by this administration. Our national security is being compromised. And our allies, people who share our Western values around the world, are being weakened, and our relationships with them are being compromised. There is more at stake in this election than maybe any other election in the history of our country. And it's not just a nice, happy idea for them to vote. It is essential. So pound home the idea that their vote is vital. Then on Election Day, and here's the voting accountability, on Election Day, call in the afternoon on their home phones, but most importantly, as many cell phones as you can find. Send a text message to as many people as you can saying, have you voted yet? Remember that today is our chance to make a difference for our country. Today is our chance to make a difference for our values. And that's the voting accountability. One of the reasons, I know that some people feel very uncomfortable about being this aggressive, but can I tell you, there is just too much at stake in this election. As radical as Obama has been for the past 4 years, keep in mind, that's how he behaved, knowing that he faced re-election. Can you imagine the assault on our values if he knows he has nothing to lose? So get your Christian friends to vote. Call them on election afternoon. Have you voted yet? Have you voted yet? Text them on Election Day, because you know what? People want to be able to answer your question, have you voted yet, with a yes. Yes, I voted. And once they've voted, mark them off in the voted column, and don't stop contacting the people on your friends list until you've marked as many of them off as voted as you can. Now here's the value of this. You are already activated. You are already a Christian, concerned, interested citizen who shares our values. That's why you're on this webinar. Can you imagine the impact on this election if each person like you and like me doesn't just cast one vote, that gets 20 or 30 or 40 people who are off the GOP radar? They're off the radar, but 20 or 30 or 40 people more are casting ballots the right way. That is how you can maximize your impact on this election. That is how, as a Christian, you can really, really make a difference for your values on November 6th. That's the end of my formal presentation, but I'm open to taking questions if there's time, Gwen.
All right. I am looking, and at this point, I don't see any questions. So I think we're going to move on. Now, I am just going to check here. I'm going to check to see, see if Diana Irie Vaughn, are you on the webinar?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Oh, that's great. Okay, everybody, we're delighted to have Diana on with us. Diana is running for Pennsylvania Treasurer, and I can't tell you how many wonderful things I have heard about her. And I think you're going to be delighted to just hear from her for a couple of minutes. So I'll let you go ahead, Diana.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank you all for being part of this wonderful group. I'm commissioner in Washington County now for 17 years, and we don't have an action group out our way. So I have people that if someone wants to talk to me later, we might be able to get a group started in southwestern Pennsylvania out of Washington County. Thanks for all you're doing. It's so important. As I said, I've been serving as commissioner for 17 years. And I've got a wonderful track record for economic development. I've focused on long-range planning. We're third in the nation in job growth. I've delivered 7 consecutive balanced budgets without a tax increase. Washington County's taxes are among the lowest in the region and the state. I took our inmates out of the jail in a program I created in '97 called FITS, put them into the community working without pay, our nonviolent offenders. And from that work that has been done, the community has now seen the good work these individuals can do. And we now have 17 companies that will employ our weekend or work release inmates who are eligible to be working but don't have jobs. And now we're collecting fees and fines and child support. So a lot of good things started happening with that program. We have our inmates working within the jail. So they're doing the laundry, the cooking, the cleaning, and we have the lowest cost in all of Pennsylvania, the lowest cost for incarcerating an inmate per day. I have 950 plus employees that I manage in Washington County with 52 different departments, 6 unions. The most relevant experience as commissioner that I bring to the Office of the State Treasury is the management of our county retirement system, our pension funds. Washington County, when I took office, I worked with my board to put together a very conservative investment policy statement, which has guided our decisions. Our asset allocation is very diversified, and we look at our portfolio about every 6 months to determine if a rebalancing makes sense at that time. When the market was doing well and we had returns of 118%, we left the money in the plan. So when we've had more difficult years, as we have in the last several years, we've had money in there, and when we've needed to put more in, we have always done what the actuary recommended. So we have a very healthy pension plan. Our funding average level since I've been in office, and I'm the only one on the pension board that's been there that long, but since I've been in, our average funding level has been 93.63%. To have a healthy fund, you need a minimum of an 80% funding level. Just to give you some background on what I've done in office. But if it's okay, could I just take a few minutes to tell you a little bit about myself?
Yes, please do.
Well, I'm a born-again Christian. I was born again in January of '99. I have faith mentors that God directed into my life, even just before that, once I was elected. I have held National Day of Prayer services in our county office building, on the steps of our courthouse. I helped to organize a Stand Up for Marriage rally, defining marriage as a union between one man and one woman. I led a nationwide effort when House Joint Resolution 81 was before Congress, and I worked some with David Barton, and this has been, I think, in my second term, we did this. We passed a resolution in Washington County, and we sent the resolution to every county and city in the U.S., urging them to pass similar resolutions that would support House Joint Resolution 81, which would define our religious freedoms to gather in public places. And I did that because we were under siege in Washington County by the KKK and the ACLU. So I've taken a very strong stand in public about my faith and how my faith and values and biblical principles guide all that I do. We've had 24-hour prayer vigils inside my office, inside county buildings. We have teams that prayer walk the courthouse constantly. We have teams that prayer walk the city of Washington. We've had groups that have gone into our buildings because, as you know, there's such a spiritual warfare that goes on, especially within our jail. So that's a little bit about me. I'm married to my second husband. He's Lieutenant Colonel in the Army Reserves, just got back from Afghanistan. This was his 5th tour. It's mine. First tour was as an Army wife. I have 3 grown children. They are 19. The youngest just started at Grove City College in mechanical engineering. My son will be 22 this coming week, and he's out on his own and managing a restaurant. And my oldest daughter, who is 23, just graduated Grove City College and is doing an internship in Disney World right now. So that's a little bit about me, and I'm happy to answer any questions anyone would have.
Okay, I am looking at the questions, and I don't really see any questions for you, Diana. I just want everybody to know that, you know, it's wonderful for us to have a Christian conservative running, but to have somebody that's so qualified for this position and to be on our side as well. We're just delighted that you could join us this morning, Diana, and thanks for calling in.
Thank you so much. And if you go to Susan B. Anthony's website, they have a feature of an article on me up that they said to us last night. So they've highlighted how close my race is. It's 33-33. As I'm sure you can imagine, I'm pro-life, no exceptions. Wow. And so they're coming out targeting to help us win this race.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, so I did put your website up here on the screen so people could see that, and they can see your picture, but we'll encourage them to go to Susan B. Anthony as well. So thank you again.
You're welcome. And if anybody has questions later, they can reach me directly at diana@irey.com, and I will answer them myself.
Sounds good. All right. We look forward to meeting you. We've got a couple of meetings. I think I'm going to see you this week. And I understand that you've promised to come to our Action Breakfast on November 3rd. And we're delighted about that.
Thank you so much. I look forward to meeting you. And God bless you all for all that you do.
Thanks, Diana. All right.
Bye-bye.
Okay. So now our next presenter is Steve Voigt. Steve, are you there?
I am.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Steve is actually, technology is wonderful. Steve is at continuing ed classes. He is an attorney, and he has won numerous awards, and he teaches a Constitution class. So I asked him to talk to you for a couple of minutes. And Amy, I'm going to change presenters over to you.
Okay. Well, first I wanted to just thank Amy and Diana for excellent presentations. Diana, best of luck. Our prayers will be with you in your race. And thank you, Gwen and Action, for putting together this excellent forum. As Gwen mentioned, I'm a lawyer, and my practice is based in Philadelphia, but I practice in quite a number of different areas. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. That I'm only going to talk for 2 or 3 minutes. The next president will likely appoint at least one, but possibly 3 new Supreme Court justices. And all of our courts, both the state and the federal level, but especially the U.S. Supreme Court, pose a potential danger to liberty whenever they exceed their rightful place under the Constitution and start legislating from the bench. If President Obama selects the next 3 justices, or frankly even 1, we can expect to suffer the social consequences for decades. This is a critically important issue to all conservatives, and as you know, the social consequences of legislation from the bench is profound for all of the issues that we care about as Christians. I'm teaching a free class to the public discussing the 2 approaches to understanding the Constitution. Either the Constitution means what it says, and this is known as strict construction, or it means whatever the whim of the day is. This is what I refer to as judicial activism. In my class, I explain these 2 approaches and discuss the consequences of judicial activism. The classes run approximately 1.5 hours, and I also talk about why the original intent of our founding fathers matters. The 1.5 hours includes my presentation, and then there'll be a period of question and answer at the end. It's about a 20-minute period of question and answer. The next class we're having is scheduled, it's on October 11th at West Chester Borough Hall in Westchester, starting at 7 p.m. And we have a couple more classes scheduled beyond that with the exact locations and times being finalized right now. But please go to my website at www.stevevoigt, all V's in there, STEVEVOIGT.com. There for a schedule of upcoming classes, and there are also quite a number of resources on there that can help you understand strict construction and what the Constitution, what particular provisions of the Constitution were intended to mean. So I hope to see as many of you at my class as possible, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk today. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Steve. We put your website up on the screen as well, and you can see that as far as the next class is Thursday, October 11th at Westchester Borough Hall. If you are in and around, I know some of you on the webinar this morning are close and do live near us in the Chester County area, but I think some of you are all over the state. So anyway, if you are in our area, we'd love for you to join Steve at his Constitution class. So anyway, all right, we're going to continue on here. Our next presenter is Chuck Proctor. And Chuck is an attorney as well, but the nice thing about him is that he is an Alliance Defense Fund attorney, which means he does a lot of pro bono work for Christians. But I'll let him talk to you. And Chuck, give me 1 second, and I need to change screens here. Okay, I just unmuted you. Are you there, Chuck?
Yes, I am, Gwen. How are you?
Okay, very good. Thanks. I'm going to get your paper here on the screen, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Gwen. I want to echo what Steve said. We have had some great presenters this morning, and Amy and Steve himself, and of course the guest appearance from Diana. Really appreciate that. I have a tough subject this morning, and I have about 15 minutes here, but I'm going to try to condense it into something that you can follow along with and learn the history of it and why this is an important issue, as well as on the screen you'll see a kind of a bullet point presentation of what we can and can't do as churches in 501c3 settings. And 501c3, for any of you that might not be familiar with it, are those corporations such as churches, ministries, other non-profit and charitable organizations that operate within the United States. And the history of what has happened here goes way back to 1954, when Lyndon Baines Johnson, who was then a senator from Texas, was running for re-election. And at that time, he's being opposed by a number of groups, including some groups that were advocating that he not be reelected, and they were advocating from the pulpit. So literally in the middle of the night, he introduced a bill in the Senate, which was subsequently ratified in the House, prohibiting churches and other 501c3 organizations from endorsing political candidates. And in the resulting almost 60 years, we have had a deafening of the pulpit on social issues because they're afraid of losing their 501c3, and quite rightly. That's an important component of any charitable organization. However, the truth of the matter is the IRS has never taken away a 501c3 standing for these reasons. There may have been other reasons, but not for this. And as Gwen mentioned, I'm a member of the Alliance Defending Freedom. We have been prepared for about 4 or 5 years now to take this matter to court, and through a number of initiatives that we have started, we have more and more churches throughout the United States. I think the first year we started with about 45 or 50 churches that are advocating political or social positions from the pulpit, and sending and taping it and sending it to the IRS. This year we expect to have several thousand churches do the same thing on what we call Speak Up Sunday, which is October 7th this year. And the more churches that do this and send it into the IRS, the more we show our strength that the First Amendment is still alive. And as Steve was talking about, and which you could learn more about, I'm sure, at his seminars, the First Amendment guarantees us free speech. And free speech is not just limited to a certain political or a certain area, a geographic area, whether it's the pulpit, whether it's the street corner. The Supreme Court has always upheld free speech, and that has not changed today. But let me focus in on what churches can do currently, and I'm talking about what the current law is and what pastors, elders, deacons can do as well. First, let's talk about the pastor, the elder, the deacon. They are all protected by the First Amendment, and if they want to endorse a candidate, if they want to put out a street sign, if they want to actively campaign for a candidate, hand out literature on their own time from their own home, they are free to do so. There is no prohibition whatsoever. If they want to contribute to a political candidate, if they want to contribute to a PAC, that's a political action committee, any other political activity that we all enjoy, they can do as individuals. If they want to have a candidate in their home, they can do so. What the IRS is saying is that from the pulpit, you cannot endorse a political candidate. Now, that's a lot different than endorsing or promoting or supporting a social or moral agenda. And the prohibition says nothing about that. If a church uses 15% or less of their resources or time in promoting or supporting a social or moral agenda, they are free to do so. If a church is active and encourages their congregation to get out the vote, voter information guides, voter information literature, they are free to do so. Absolutely no prohibition on that. What the current law says is that a pastor cannot, from the pulpit, only from the pulpit, endorse a candidate. Now, the pastor could have 2 candidates or 3 candidates or 10 candidates. He can invite them all to the church to speak. And it can be during a Sunday service, it could be during the midweek service, it could be whenever you choose, as long as they're all invited. They don't all have to appear, they just have to be invited. If only one of the candidates shows up, that candidate can speak. That candidate can hand out literature. The pastor is only prohibited, and the church is only prohibited, from endorsing a particular candidate. The church cannot give money to a candidate. The church cannot give money to a political action committee. However, the church can support social and moral issues, and that's what a church is for. whether it's same-sex marriage, whether it's abortion, whether it's even fiscal responsibility. Those are social and moral issues. And if we're endorsing fiscal responsibility, if we're opposing gay marriage, if you pick any issue, if you're pro-life, and I hate that pro-choice thing because it's just an acronym that means nothing and confuses people. If you're pro-life, you can advocate that, but pastors have become concerned, and rightly so, that they're going to lose their 501c3. Frankly, right now we're looking for the IRS to try to test this issue because we're completely prepared. We've done all the research in order to defend a church or pastor that takes this approach. Someone who is willing to stand up and speak the truth about biblical values and biblical morals and apply them to individual candidates. And it doesn't matter whether the candidate is Mitt Romney or Barack Obama, or whether it's your local committee person. It applies throughout the spectrum of the political scene. Now, in supporting that, in doing that, quite often churches will have a voter registration drive within their church hall. They can hand out voter registration materials and absentee ballots. They can give voter guides where it compares the candidates. When they do that, they just have to be fair about it in terms of listing all the candidates and their positions. And sometimes that's very difficult, but putting that information out is critical. The League of Women Voters does great work, and other organizations of that nature. But personally, how much more effective would it be if a church were to give out a guide that said, let's compare the candidates, whether it's your local committee person or whether it's the President of the United States, showing where they stand on each of the issues. And if it's not clear where they stand, indicating where they don't stand. Understanding these concepts, since we've started this series of presentations, I've gotten many calls from a number of pastors that have heard this, and this is not the only time that this information is going to be presented. The Pastors Network here in Pennsylvania has already started a series of lectures and talks throughout Pennsylvania to encourage and support pastors and let them know that they are not alone in the pulpit. They're not alone in their homes. They're not alone in their congregations in this issue. And I know there's, in fact, I believe yesterday was a breakfast meeting in Lancaster. There's one coming up in Philadelphia. They're going to be throughout the state to encourage pastors to speak up and speak the truth biblically for those candidates that support the values that are so important. And that's why Gwen has entitled this a values-oriented seminar, or webinar, I should say, so that people can understand they don't have to be afraid to speak the truth. You, if you're not a pastor, can say under the First Amendment whatever you choose. You are not prohibited by this limitation. There are, I can't get into it all, but for those of you that aren't familiar with it, beyond 501c3s, there are many other types of organizations, 501c4, 5, 6, etc., referring to organizations that are designed to do public works and aren't necessarily taxable per se, because they're not a corporation, they're not a for-profit organization. The thing about a 501c3 that's so critical is, in addition to the church or the charity not having to pay income taxes or other types of taxes, including property taxes, is that you, the contributor, are able to take it as a tax deduction. So you can see the huge impact here that this has. If the IRS were to address this issue and they were to be successful, which we believe they would not be, we can't imagine any Supreme Court denying this First Amendment right, the impact would filter down in terms of you've lost your 501c exemption, and now you're paying income taxes, you're paying property taxes, and your congregation loses the tax deduction. That's a huge benefit. But we have a government today that is constrained by a $16 trillion debt. I was with an accountant who from New York who's working closely with the OCC, and next year, out of $4.3 trillion that we're going to spend, we're only going to take in 2.8. That's another $1.5 trillion in deficit as currently proposed. And they're looking to make up the money somewhere. Another area where the government, and very few people are aware of this, December 31st, the exemption on federal estate tax is going to expire and revert to a $1 million exemption. Anything over $1 million will be taxed at 36% of your assets. The same thing would apply to a church or a 501c3. Now, when I talk about charities, there are many charities, and at our breakfast 2 weeks ago for the pastors, we were supported by not only the Pastors Network, but by Serving Leaders. And Serving Leaders is an organization, a 501c3, that supports pastors and is led by a man named Dave Wheatus, who is also an Alliance Defending Freedom attorney. He's an attorney. He does counseling with pastors, helping them understand not only issues like this, but helping them through many other issues in their church. Pastors need not be afraid is the bottom line. They need to understand that in these situations, there are people, there are organizations that will represent them pro bono, no charge. We're looking for these people in order to move them along. Now, as you can see on your screen, and if anybody wants, I can get them a list of a hard copy of this or email it to them, is a rough bullet point of the things you can or can't do. And I'm sure there's other things, there's other areas where you may have a question of, well, can I do this? Can I do that? Please feel free to contact us. We'll get back to you with more detailed information on these lists of things that churches can do and what pastors can do. And don't be afraid to speak up. Now is the time to let your church know and to let our politicians know that we're not going to let the First Amendment go away simply because of something that was done in the middle of the night in 1954 by a politician who just was trying to limit his opposition to being reelected. If this had been thought out for some other reason, such as separation of church and state, which is a total misnomer, and unfortunately I don't have time to get into that, but if you read the First Amendment, it says that the United States government will pass no law establishing a religion in the United States. That's it. They're not going to support any particular religion. So whether you're a Christian or you're Jewish or what have you, they're not going to interfere with that. That has nothing to do with separation of church and state. That phrase was picked up by a Supreme Court justice in the 50s from a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to a Baptist church that had questioned him about the First Amendment. And he responded, and in one sentence, he used that phrase, taken completely out of context. If you Google it, it'll pop up. You can read the letter from the Bridgeport Baptist Church in Connecticut, and you can read Thomas Jefferson's reply. A little bit difficult because it's older English, but it's still very clear what he was trying to say and what the Bridgeport Baptist Church was asking him. And today, it's just been turned around. The Supreme Court justice took that phrase, Lyndon Baines Johnson's got a law passed, and everybody's afraid to step out. Don't be afraid. Speak up, ask the questions, because you have the support. You have the people here that will back you up 100% and protect our rights as citizens, as believers, as people that want to support the truth here in the United States. Gwen, I think I'm out of time, but I think I timed that pretty well. But I'm glad to take any questions on this because it is a tough subject, and there are a lot of nuances and gray areas on this.
Well, we do have some questions, and I kind of have been lax in doing the questions because a couple of them have been building up. But I didn't really want to interrupt the presentation. So one of them is, Can a pastor endorse a candidate on campaign literature and list the name of the church if there's a disclaimer that the title is just for identification purposes only?
If it's done that way, absolutely yes. If there's any misleading indication that the church as well as the pastor is backing up that candidate, no, you can't do that. But if you put down John Jones supports a such and such candidate, and he is a pastor at such and such church, but it's doing it in his individual capacity, that's fine.
Okay. All right. And I'm just going to do another question real quick here because we are starting to run out of time. Why hasn't there been enforcement over the years? And kind of like the secondary question there is like, why don't churches or 501c3s, why don't they engage in these kind of activities?
Well, Gwen, those are great questions. Number one, we believe that the IRS knows that they would lose in a heartbeat if this got to the Supreme Court. And the path to the Supreme Court in any tax issue is a little bit different than the normal court system. You start with tax court and then work up through the appellate circuit court appellate system and then to the Supreme Court. But nonetheless, I believe that they know that they would get nowhere. They have nothing to back up their position that they can stop a 501c3 from expressing their opinions. And as a result, I don't think that they want to take that on. And that's why they haven't done any more. Occasionally there have been some letters that have gone out to people, but that's it. The second question, I think, goes strictly to the way this law was passed and then the way the information about it was disseminated. And in pastors that I've talked to, they say, "Oh, we just can't do anything politically. We have to stay away from that." And many churches, as a result, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, but some of their sermons and what have you, and some of their positions have become a little bland on some of these important social issues. And it's due to a lack of information and understanding. And as I said, since we started this series a few weeks ago, Gwen, I have gotten calls from a number of pastors saying, "Thank you for the information. We didn't know that. We just didn't have the information." And that's part of the disinformation policy of the government, of the liberals. They don't want you to know what is truly going on. And that's why Lyndon Johnson did this in the middle of the night. When I say it was in the middle of the night, it was literally after midnight when he introduced this bill and got it passed.
Wow.
And everybody thought, oh, it sounded good, or they had other issues on their mind. Of course, I wasn't there at the time, but it just flew right through.
Wow.
And since that time, there hasn't been anybody to really dispel the misinformation that's gone out there. And even as it is, I still see some pastors look at me and they're just very concerned, because without that 501c3 standing, without the ability for a contributor, a member of the congregation, to get a tax deduction, and property taxes being what they are today, you would have a whole different oppression of religion in this country that our founding fathers didn't want, and which even the IRS code recognizes. That 501c3 exemption is part of the IRS code, which was passed back in 1914, not in 1789 when the Constitution was passed.
Okay, I'm just going to do a couple things real quick here, quick answers for you. Can you mention again, George wants to stress and tell us again, how can you get this screen that's on our sheet, the sheet that's on our screen, sorry.
If anybody would just wants to email me at cproctor@cplaw1, the number 1.com, and that's PROCTOR. I'll be glad to email you or hard copy to you. In addition to that bullet sheet, I have letters or further documentation that explains each one of those 19 points, further detail on each one of the 19 points, so that you don't have just the bullet point. You've got a reference system
Good.
there
And
that'll go over
if
every
they
one
did,
of those points.
if they didn't get your email, they can email Gwen at actionofpa.org. They can do that, and I'll forward that on to Chuck. So anyway, and just about Amy's presentation, just we want to mention that sending voter registration and absentee ballots to college students is a really, really good idea. So we have one more presentation, and that's actually my presentation. I'm going to thank you, Chuck, for your part. This was really very, very helpful, and we really appreciate you being with us this morning. And I'm going to start this part of the presentation that we actually call Vote Your Values, because that was the name of the webinar. So we're going to talk a little bit about voting your values. I am going to, I need to do a couple technical things here, if you'll give me a second. And then I can get started. All right, vote your values, a call to action. Just talking about voting your values and voting in any type of election, from a local election to a presidential election, provides an important way to voice your opinions regarding elected leaders and even overall policies. Voting also helps you decide your own future by electing a person who might reflect your values and your views. The ability to vote exists as one of the most cherished constitutional rights that many have fought for, marched for, and even died for over the centuries. If the right to vote no longer existed, the country would no longer survive as a democratic republic, but it would be completely totalitarian. By not voting, you give away your right to influence the government overall. But more importantly, not voting takes away the will of the majority that governs this country and replaces it with the will of the minority. Because this sacred right has been guaranteed to all citizens of the nation, you should take the initiative to vote for someone or something that reflects your overall values. So your vote is your voice. All right, for Christians, Matthew 5:13-16 says that we're to be salt and light. So we must take seriously the responsibility to put God first, but not only in our homes, but in our government as well. So what is a Christian's call to action? There's 4 P's here: pray, process, participate, and persevere. So the first one, pray, you're probably familiar with 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land. All right, the second one is process. We need to understand the process. Where do our rights come from? We need to be familiar with the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And we highly recommend that if you're in the Chester County area, that you attend Steve Voigt's Constitution class. Almost every other constitution of every other country has been abandoned, overthrown, or rewritten numerous times. The United States is the only over 200-year-old country that still has its original constitution. And there's good reason for this, and it's because it's based on biblical principles and it works. So participate. Participating within the process for change is the ultimate key to success. It's futile to gripe and complain about what you consider to be wrong or unjust and not participate. And James 4:17 says, therefore, to him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin. And lastly, number 4, persevere. When fighting for the right, we must never cease until we prevail. The battle is not always won by the strongest or the smartest or the most elite, but ultimately comes to those who persist and persevere. So how can we participate? So there's a number of ways. You can call your legislators, you can visit your legislators, you can write letters to the editor, and you can vote your values. So that's what we're going to talk about. How do you vote your values? Two ways. Number one, to know the issues, and number two, know the candidates. All right, so what are the issues? There's a number of issues you'll see here. So what's important to you? Is it big government or small government? Freedom of religion, marriage, the Constitution, education, abortion, a strong military or a weak military? There's a lot of issues. So let's take a look at some of those issues, and certainly more can be found on our website at actionofpa.org. First one we're going to look at is freedom of religion. So if we compare what the parties believe about freedom of religion, generally the Democrat Party says, we should muzzle religion or at least save it for Sunday morning. And the Republican Party basically believes that there should be a free expression of religion and allow prayer to be in meetings and open expression. All right. The next issue is the Constitution. So the Democrat Party believes that this is a living, breathing document. In other words, it can change with the whims of society. The Republican Party believes it's a fixed document similar to a contract. If you take Steve Voigt's class, I thought that was such a very interesting point that he makes, that the Republican Party believes that the Constitution is a contract. In other words, it means what it says. Any other contract that goes to court, the judge reads the contract and believes that it means what it says, except for the Constitution. All right, education. The Democrat Party basically believes that tax money should go only to the public school monopoly, whereas the Republican Party believes that the tax money should follow the student, or it should be able to go to charter schools or for a school choice program. And on the economy, the Democrat Party believes that we can solve our economic problems by raising our taxes. And the Republican Party says our economic problems will be solved by an across-the-board tax decrease. In other words, businesses cannot expand and hire more employees if their taxes are going up. All right, and abortion. The Democrat Party says no protection for the unborn. And it's that expression that Chuck Proctor doesn't like, pro-choice. And the Republican Party believes that it should protect the life of the unborn. All right, and government dependency. The Democrat Party says you can't do anything on your own. You need to depend on the government. And the Republican Party says personal freedom and responsibility, and that means people are less dependent on the government. So a lot of other issues can be found on our website, actionofpa.org, and you can go there and see that we have more issues and more comparisons there. Just a moment to talk about who we are. We're a political action committee, and a political action committee is an organization formed to support candidates and or issues. We're Action of PA, and Action is an acronym for Americans for Christian Traditions in Our Nation. PAC allows members through relatively small donations to have a powerful voice in the political process. And a PAC is registered with the government and is allowed to endorse and even financially contribute to candidates. The goal of Action is to empower Christians by informing and educating them to ensure that men and women of character are elected to positions from the lowest level to the governor's mansion. All right, now talking about this year's important national election, in recent decades, U.S. presidential candidates have won the election by less than 9 million votes. And by winning that position, they've appointed the most anti-Judeo-Christian cabinet judges and executives in the history of the United States. And they've also appointed the most anti-church cabinet judges and executives in the history of the United States. And they've also appointed the most anti-freedom to evangelize cabinet judges and executives. There are over 60 million evangelical Christians of voting age in the United States. Yet even with our freedoms to obey the Great Commission being taken away from us, over 40 million do not even vote. So Ronald Reagan said, "We're at war with the most dangerous enemy that has ever faced mankind." And it's been said that if we lose that war and in so doing lose this freedom of ours, history will record with the greatest astonishment that those who had the most to lose did the least to prevent its happening. So listen, I just want to thank you so much for joining us in our webinar. I hope that it's been informative to us. I hope you'll go to our website, actionofpa.org, and you can always contact us. You have my email is Gwen, Gwenne, at actionofpa.org. So again, thank you for joining, and have a good morning.